I need to tell you about a night that happened almost 400 years ago and has never been explained. Not for lack of trying. Historians have tried, philosophers have tried, psychologists have tried, nobody made it. Because what happened that night doesn't fit into any category that the modern mind uses to organize reality. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't an outbreak. It wasn't an emotional breakdown. It was something that transformed one of the greatest geniuses in history into a completely different man in a matter of hours. And he produced a document that he carried sewn inside his clothes for the rest of his life without telling anyone. The man was Blaise Pascal. The document was found after his death, hidden in the lining of his coat. And the first words written on that parchment were just one: fire. But before I tell you what happened that night, I need to take you somewhere else. To a place you know well, a place you've been, maybe yesterday, maybe last week, maybe years ago, a place that is not on a map, but is more real than any address. It's that moment when you looked at the sky and felt it. Didn't think, felt. Something huge, something that couldn't be put into words. Something that made my entire life seem small and at the same time infinitely important. Something that, for a second, just a second, made everything make sense. Not in the logical sense. In the sense that comes before logic. In the sense that the entire body recognizes it before the mind has a chance to process it. Maybe it was looking at stars, perhaps holding a newborn child, perhaps in front of a landscape that took your breath away. Maybe in the middle of a song that took you to a place that doesn't exist on the map, but that seemed like the truest place you've ever visited. Maybe in a moment of pain so deep that everything became silent, and in that silence, you felt something that wasn't pain, something behind the pain, something bigger. And then the moment passed, and you came back. And you probably never told anyone. Because how do you explain that? For whom? With what words? I looked at the sky and felt that there was something bigger. People will look at you with pity. They'll think it's nonsense. They'll say it was hormones, which was a neural reaction, which was the brain doing things that brains do. But you know it wasn't. You know that moment was true in a way that materialistic explanations don't capture. True in a way that is prior to any theory, prior to any argument. True in a way that you feel in your bones. And I want to tell you that one of the greatest mathematicians of all time would agree with you. Not only would I agree, he would say that moment is some of the most powerful evidence there is. That mathematics, the most rigorous language the human mind has ever created, points in the same direction that your heart pointed in that second before the sky. Pascal was not just any man. And I need you to understand the level of genius we are discussing here, because without it, what he said about God loses the weight it deserves. Blaise Pascal was born in 1623 in France, and before he turned 20, he had already done more for science than most scientists do in a lifetime. At the age of 12, without ever having received formal instruction in geometry, he rediscovered Euclid's fundamental propositions on his own. He literally reinvented ancient geometry by drawing figures on the bedroom floor. The father, who was a mathematician, found the boy demonstrating theorems and was speechless. At 16, Pascal wrote a treatise on conic sections that impressed France's greatest mathematicians. The great Descartes, when he saw the work, refused to believe that it had been written by a teenager. He thought the father had made it and named it after his son. At 19, he invented the Pascaline, one of the first mechanical calculators in history, a machine that did additions and subtractions automatically using gears. In a world without electricity, without semiconductors, without anything we associate with computing, a 19-year-old boy built a machine that calculates. And it worked. And then came the contribution that is perhaps the most important of all to modern life. Together with Pierre de Fermat, Pascal founded the theory of probability, the science of calculating chances, the mathematics of uncertainty. This may seem abstract, but without probability theory, there are no statistics. Without statistics, there is no evidence-based medicine. There is no such thing as data science. There is no artificial intelligence. There is no modern financial market. There is no weather forecast. Every time someone says a vaccine is 95% effective, they are using tools that Pascal helped create. And he contributed to physics too, studied fluid pressure. He demonstrated the existence of a vacuum against the predominant doctrine of the time that said that nature hates a vacuum. Formulated Pascal's principle, which says that pressure applied to a confined fluid transmits equally in all directions, which is the basis of all hydraulic technology. The unit of pressure in the International System of Units is named after him. All this done by a man who died at the age of 39, destroyed by illnesses that accompanied him since childhood, chronic headaches, digestive problems, severe insomnia, periods of extreme weakness in which he could barely stand up. Pascal lived with pain and produced genius, and he died too soon, leaving the world poorer for his absence and richer for what he left behind. And now I want to take you to that night. November 23rd, 1654. Pascal was 31 years old. Nobody knows exactly what happened. Pascal himself did not explain it in detail. All we have is the parchment he wrote that night and sewed inside his coat. And the words on that scroll are from someone who is on fire. Not literally, spiritually, emotionally, existentially. Fire. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. Not of philosophers and wise men. Certainty, feeling, happiness, peace. Pascal was making a distinction that is profoundly important. He was saying that the God he encountered that night was not the God of philosophical arguments. It was not Aristotle's unmoved mover. He was not the cosmic clockmaker of deism. It wasn't a cold, distant, logical conclusion. It was a person, a presence, something, someone that revealed itself directly to him with an intensity that no equation, no theorem, no mathematical demonstration could produce. And this man, this genius who understood reason better than almost any human being alive, was saying that what he found that night was not reason. It was something more, something that reason alone cannot achieve, something that uses another channel, another instrument, another sense. And it was from this experience that Pascal wrote his most famous phrase, the phrase that everyone knows, but that almost no one really understands. The heart has reasons that reason does not know. Most people hear this phrase and think that Pascal was being romantic, that he was talking about feelings versus logic, emotion versus reason. But it wasn't that. Pascal was too much of a mathematician to disregard reason. He was saying something much more precise. I was saying that there's a type of knowledge that formal reason does not produce, that there is a way of knowing that does not go through logical demonstration, that the heart, and when Pascal says heart, he doesn't mean superficial emotion, he means the deepest layer of human perception, has access to truths that the rational mind cannot reach. And this is not irrationalism. It is the recognition that reason is an extraordinary but limited tool, that there are dimensions of reality that it does not capture, that there are truths that are real but not demonstrable, and that denying these truths because they cannot be demonstrated rationally is as irrational as denying the existence of the sun because you are inside a windowless room. And this is where Pascal makes the connection with that moment you had, looking at the sky, that moment when you felt something bigger. Because Pascal would say that at that moment, his heart was working. It was doing what it was designed to do. I was perceiving a dimension of reality that reason alone cannot reach. I was capturing a signal that the intellect does not detect, but which is as real as any empirical data. And mathematics agrees with this. And this is the part that I find most fascinating of Pascal's entire story. Because he didn't see mathematics and faith as enemies. I saw them as allies who point in the same direction along different paths. Mathematics shows that the universe is ordered, who follows laws, which has a structure that can be described with equations of absurd precision. And this order is evidence, a clue, because order does not arise from chance. Laws do not write themselves. Mathematical structure does not appear in random universes. Mathematics, by revealing the order of the cosmos, is revealing the footprints of something that is not random, of something you think, what plans, what organizes. And when you combine the mathematical evidence, order, law, structure, with the evidence of the heart, that feeling that there is something greater, the two converge. They point in the same direction. They say the same thing in different languages. Mathematics says in equations, there is intelligence behind the universe. The heart says in feelings, there is something greater. The two voices agree. And Pascal understood this with the clarity of someone who inhabited both worlds. The world of numbers and the world of the heart, the world of equations and the world of experience. And he saw that the two worlds were not in conflict. They were in harmony, two witnesses of the same event. But Pascal went further, because he was not a man to stick to generalities. He was a man who could go deep, to seek the ultimate consequences, to follow logic wherever it led. And he went to a place that many people prefer to avoid, Pascal's Wager. And I need to explain this to you in a way that honors the real depth of the argument, because the stakes are much more than most people think. Pascal looked at the human situation and saw something that bothered him. He saw that most people live in indifference to the most important question there is, the question about God, about the meaning of life, about what happens after death. And he saw that this indifference is irrational, deeply irrational. And he wanted to demonstrate this using the tool he helped create, probability theory. The reasoning is as follows. There are two possibilities. God exists or does not exist. You can't prove either with absolute certainty. But you have to live one way or another. You need to choose. Even not choosing is a choice. And the consequences of that choice are asymmetrical in a way that should be impossible to ignore. If God exists, and you choose to live in relationship with him, the gain is infinite. Not big, infinite, eternal life. Communion with the Creator, absolute meaning, total fullness. Everything the human heart has ever desired without knowing what it was wishing for. If God exists and you choose to ignore him, the loss is total, not partial, total. Because you lost the only thing that really mattered. If God doesn't exist and you lived as if he did, what have you lost? Some pleasures you gave up, some time he dedicated to prayer, community, reflection. But he gained a life with purpose, with values, with community, with hope. It's not a significant loss. If God doesn't exist and you lived as if he didn't, what have you gained? Nothing eternal. Because nothing is eternal in materialism. Some temporary pleasures, a few years of unrestricted freedom, and then nothing. Forever. And Pascal, as a probability theorist, does the calculation. When one scenario involves infinite gain and the opposite scenario involves total loss, any non-zero probability of God existing, even tiny, even ridiculously small, makes the bet rational. Because any number multiplied by infinity is infinite. The rational bet, the mathematically correct bet, is to live as if God existed, even if the probability is 1%, 0.5%, 1,000,000%. Now, the reviews. I know they exist, and I want to deal with them honestly. The first is that you cannot force belief. You can't decide to believe like you decide to buy a car. Belief doesn't work like that. And Pascal would agree. He wasn't telling you to pretend to believe. I was telling you to investigate, to take the issue seriously, to dedicate time, energy, and intellectual honesty to the most important question there is instead of nonchalantly pushing it under the rug. The second is that there are many possible gods. Pascal does not specify which god. Which god do you choose? But Pascal was a Christian, and within his context, the argument pointed to Christ. And he had specific reasons for this, historical, philosophical, and personal reasons that he develops in other writings. The bet was not an isolated argument, it was part of a bigger case. The third, and most profound, is that the wager seems to reduce God to a utilitarian calculation. It seems to say, believe in God because it is advantageous. And this does not seem worthy of either God or human beings. But here I think people misunderstand Pascal's point. He wasn't saying that the reason to believe is the advantage. I was saying that the reason to investigate is what is at stake. Advantage is not the reason for faith. It is the reason for the investigation. It's the reason to stop being indifferent and take the question seriously. And when you take the question seriously, when you really investigate, when you really search, when you really stop and look, that's when genuine faith can be born. Not from the calculation, from the search, from the meeting, from experience, from the same fire that Pascal found that November night. And now I want to go back to that feeling, and in that moment when you looked up at the sky. Because everything Pascal wrote, the bet, the thoughts, the parchment sewn into his coat, all of it is the attempt of a genius to put into words something that is beyond words, and that something is exactly what you felt at that moment. Pascal had a name for this. He called it the hidden God, the God who reveals himself enough to those who seek honestly, but who hides himself enough for the search to be necessary. That leaves clues everywhere, in the order of the universe, in the beauty of nature, in the emptiness of the human heart, in that feeling before the sky. But that does not impose itself. What an invitation. That whispers. What a weight. And Pascal thought this was on purpose, that God hides not out of cruelty but out of love, because a God who revealed himself with overwhelming evidence would eliminate freedom. It would eliminate choice. If God appears, if in the sky with letters of fire saying, I exist, no one would have a choice. Everyone would be forced to accept. And faith would not be faith. It would be a confirmation. And love wouldn't be love. It would be mandatory. But God wants to be found by those who seek, not by those who are forced. He wants to be loved by those who choose, not by those who have no choice. And that's why he hides. But he hides, leaving clues. And the clues are everywhere. In the numbers. In the stars. In the void. In beauty. In pain. That moment when the world stopped and you felt it. And mathematics is one of those clues. The order of the universe. The elegance of laws. The irrational effectiveness of mathematics Wigner described centuries later. Fine-tuning constants. The information in DNA. Each of these things is a clue, a brand, a footprint of the hidden God. And that feeling you had looking at the sky is another clue, perhaps the most direct of all, because mathematical clues pass through the intellect. They require study, they require analysis, they require argumentation. But the feeling passes through the heart, goes straight, no intermediary, no translation. And that's why it's so powerful, and that's why it's scary. Because when you feel something directly, without the mediation of intellect, without the filter of reason, The experience has an intensity that the most brilliant argument cannot reproduce. That's why that moment stuck with you. That's why you never forgot. Not because he was emotionally strong, because it was existentially true. It was the truth entering through a channel that reason does not control. The channel that Pascal called the heart. And Pascal made one more observation that I think needs to be said. An observation about the way we live, about the way we ran away. He said that all human unhappiness comes from one thing, not being able to sit still in a room alone. That we fill our lives with noise, activity, distraction, entertainment, work, rush, so we don't have to stop. Because when it stops, the questions come. And the questions are too big, and too heavy, and too real. And in today's world, this observation is 1,000 times more true than in Pascal's time, because Pascal lived in a world without a cell phone. No internet, no social media, no streaming, no notifications. Without the ability to be distracted 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And even then, he already saw that people were running away from the silence. Imagine what he would say today, when silence is almost impossible, when every empty second is filled by a screen, when the slightest sign of boredom is combated with an infinite scroll of content that says nothing but fills time. When all of humanity is so addicted to distraction that stopping for 3 minutes without external stimulation seems like torture, Pascal would say we are running away, escaping from the void, running away from questions, escaping that feeling that appears when we look at the sky and that says something we don't want to hear. There is something bigger. And if there is something greater, then the life I'm living may not be enough. And he would say that escape is the problem, not the solution. Because emptiness doesn't disappear when you ignore it. He stays, still, waiting. And every distraction is just a postponement. Every noise is just a temporary muffle. The void is still there, patient, silent, with an infinity shape, shaped like God. And I want to end with something that is perhaps the truest thing Pascal wrote. The most profound observation, the most uncomfortable, the most liberating. Pascal said that within every human being there is an infinite abyss. A void that nothing fills, that we try to fill with pleasure, with power, with money, with fame, with relationships, with achievements, with experiences. But nothing fits, nothing completely satisfies. Because the void is infinite, and finite things don't fill infinite spaces. Only infinity fills infinity. Only God fills the space that is shaped like God. Maybe you recognize this. Maybe you have achieved things, achieved goals, bought what I wanted to buy, arrived where I wanted to be. And yet he felt that something was missing, that at the top of the mountain the air is rarefied and the view is beautiful, but the emptiness is still there, that each achievement satisfies for a while and then the restlessness returns. There's always one more step, one more thing, one more objective, and none of them really resolve it. Pascal would say it's not because things are bad, it's because they are finite, and your desire is infinite. An infinite desire is not satisfied with finite things. It is only satisfied with infinity, with God. And that moment looking at the sky, that second when everything made sense, that feeling that there is something bigger, it was the void recognizing what was missing. It was the infinite space within you vibrating in the presence of something infinite outside of you. It was the format recognizing the piece, the lock feeling the key, and the math agrees. The order of the universe points to a mind. The structure of laws points to a legislator. The elegance of the equations points to an artist. The intelligibility of the cosmos points to an intelligence that made the human mind and the universe so that they fit together. Everything converges. Everything points in the same direction. Numbers and the heart, reason and feeling, the equation and the moment before the sky. Pascal lived in both worlds, the world of numbers and the world of fire. The world of equations and the world of parchment sewn into the coat. And he saw that there are not two worlds. It's just one. Seen from two angles, described in two languages, but pointing to the same place, for even someone, for the same God. If you look at the sky and feel like there's something bigger, don't dismiss that feeling. Don't rationalize. Don't run away. Because one of the greatest mathematical geniuses in history felt the same way, investigated the same thing. And he found, at the bottom of it all, exactly what the feeling promised. Someone. Real. Gift. Waiting. With the patience of someone who hid clues in every equation, in every star, in every beat of the human heart, and who now waits for you to put the clues together and reach him. The math agrees with your heart, and your heart knows things that reason doesn't know. Pascal knew about both, and what he found at the intersection of the two was fire, certainty, happiness, peace, and a God who does not belong to philosophers and wise men, but who is real in a way that no equation captures and that no heart forgets. If this touched on something you've never told anyone, leave a like. If it made sense in a way that goes beyond the intellect, comment below. If someone comes to mind, share. Subscribe to the channel, See you in the next one.